Now, the fog of war hides more than what it reveals. Now, often years after the war's end, there are questions that still remain unanswered. And not because no one could find an answer to them, just because leaving some questions unanswered serves the interests of the winning side. In the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war, things are no different. Nearly 17 months into the war, the world already has a lot of unanswered questions, like who blew up the Nord Stream pipelines, or who attacked the Crimean bridge on the 8th of October last year, or who breached the Novakhovka Dam, or who led the drone attack on Kremlin. Now, adding to the many mysteries, the world now has a new question. Did the United Kingdom help Ukraine attack the Crimean bridge earlier in the week? Now, according to an independent news site, Grey Zone, British intelligence figures allegedly conspired with Ukraine's security service to attack the Crimean bridge. Now, the report has made these allegations citing documents obtained from an unnamed source. And Monday's airstrike on the bridge linking the Russian mainland to Crimea killed a couple and also wounded their daughter. The bridge was a pet project of the Russian President Vladimir Putin, physically linking Crimea with the Russian mainland, and it is something that no Tsar or former president could do. So when President Putin did it, he wanted all eyes to, of course, capture the event. When the bridge was opened in 2018, the Russian president himself drove a truck across it. The bridge came under attack for the very first time on the 8th of October, and no one claimed responsibility for the attack. But when it came under attack this week again, in a first, Ukraine called it a huge success. The Grey Zone reporter said that Ukraine was not alone in orchestrating the attack. It is said that a cabal of British military intelligence freelancers drafted detailed plans for destroying the Crimean bridge. The plans were allegedly made months earlier, which was led by a senior intelligence operative and a former high-ranking NATO advisor, Chris Donnelly. The Crimean Road and Rail Bridge, also known as the Kerch Bridge, is crucial for the supply of fuel, food and other products to Crimea. It also has become a major supply route for the Russian forces after the beginning of the Ukrainian conflict in February 2022. And to give us more insights into this, we're being joined by security and defense expert David Dunn. He's a professor of international politics at the University of Birmingham. He's joining us live on this broadcast. Now, Professor, this is a serious allegation that is being leveled. It appears, or so it states, that the British intelligence agents may have played some role in the attack that took place on the Kerch Bridge. What do you make of this allegation?
Well, I think it's one of those aspects of the fog of war that you mentioned that actually we have no idea whether this was the case in terms of whether there's any evidence to corroborate that. There are allegations flying around on all sides and all sorts for all the incidents that you mentioned, and it will probably take years before we have a clear idea of who was responsible for doing what in particular. That said, it would not be surprising to find that former military personnel now employed as contractors may be giving advice to Ukrainian special forces in the particular use of certain technologies. Now, whether they're agents of the British state is another matter entirely. I think that the UK and the US and other parties will be very careful to make sure that there's no ability to attribute military action to someone who is a direct employee of the state. They are very clear in trying to indicate that the limits of this conflict, that they supply material to Ukraine. That material is limited in terms of where it should be used. So, for example, the Storm Shadow weapon that Britain has supplied to Ukraine has been made very clear to the Ukrainians that they can't use that against targets on Russian territory proper, rather than occupied Ukrainian territory. So there are clear limits to what the UK does. So I would be skeptical about the idea that this is British agents or American agents or anybody else directly involved in such a mission. And I'd wonder as to what interest the person who reported that has in saying so.
Right, that's a very interesting question that you've raised. And also the other aspect that you said, these military contractors, or if we could use another term, mercenaries who are employed by Ukraine, They could be British nationals or American nationals or nationals from different other parts of the world. They could be involved in operations like this, maybe perhaps not in directly carrying out an attack of this nature, but definitely in planning and in logistics. That could be a possibility. But do you think the British and the American governments, if they were to be looking at the role that is played by the mercenaries, do you think they would be in some ways responsible for what their nationals would be doing in the employ of the Ukrainian government?
I think that's no. I mean, they would be very keen to distance themselves, and in fact, actually, the Ukrainians have been very clear to make a comparison between the occupation of the Ukrainian provinces of Donetsk in 2014, whereby Russia sent in huge battalions of men in green uniform, so-called little green men who hadn't got insignia. And on those occasions, Russia said, oh no, they're just private citizens going on holiday. That was how they described their intervention at that particular point. And Ukraine has said, well, if there are foreign nationals operating in our country, they're doing so as private individuals, making a link to the much more serious provocation that the Russians did in 2014. So I think what we're seeing is a conflict that affects the whole world. The Russia's decision to stop allowing Ukrainian grain to be sold and transported across the Black Sea will affect everybody. It will affect food supplies in India and Africa, across the world. It's not surprising that everyone's security agencies will be keen to give advice of some form or another to the parties involved in this conflict. There will be an effort made to make sure there is a separation between who those individuals are and whether they are representatives of the state or not.
Absolutely, indeed. Thank you very much indeed, Professor Dunn, for joining us and getting us all those insights there.
Thank you.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.